For you.
Okay, great. So, thank you for joining us today. It's an honor to have you on the podcast. I would like for you to give us a short introduction of yourself and your background so the users can, so that our listeners can get basically a bit of a better overview on what topics we will discuss today.
Sure. So my name's Ian Cook. I am currently the SVP of AI at a company called Qloo. It's
Mm-hmm.
spelled Qloo, but it's pronounced Qloo. We
Mm-hmm.
do cultural intelligence data as a service for large organizations looking to increase their ability to do recommendations and personalization. So we're kind of the industry would call B to B to C. So we sell to businesses who then have apps and tools that regular consumers can use. I've spent the past 15, 16 years of my life in the world of data science, machine learning, AI. I got older, but the name kind of got cooler. I started out doing like econometrics and statistics and programming. And then suddenly I was a data scientist. And a little while after that, I was a machine learning engineer. And now I do AI. I have been at a number of startups that have been in a number of various industries, from predicting the movements in electricity markets to healthcare to consumer packaged goods. So I've built teams, built products. I'd say the big thing that runs through all of my career is wanting to get things out in the hands of people who are going to use them and see benefit from them. So I want to derive a whole lot of value through these tools that I create and that I work with other people to create.
That's awesome. And actually, I like the fact about product that you mentioned that I want to get tools out in people's hands because that's the best thing about product, like getting feedback from your users. You don't really know what's going on out there if no one is using it. So, yeah.
Totally agreed. It's good to see people use it. How do they break it? How do they find value in it? What could be better? So I always have liked that very fast interaction between putting something out and seeing it come back. So, I've done a PhD and that was terrific, but research just wasn't fast enough for me. I loved doing it. I loved the process of research, breaking down a problem, finding good answers to really hard questions. But that by the time somebody reads it and then gives you a review, and then it shows up in a journal, and then it shows up, people can start talking about it. It's just years long, and I wanted that loop to be much, much smaller.
Yeah, that's awesome. So let's start on with our first, maybe let's say, direction. So we're
Sure.
going towards the safety audit. So in healthcare and defense, AI mistakes can be non-negotiable because there are people's lives at stake. So for the everyday business owner or founder, how should they think about AI safety?
That is a terrific question. So you're right. A lot of these tools have some amount of unpredictability because of the nature of what they do, right? So a lot of people will call these things stochastic or non-deterministic. Basically, it comes down to the idea that if I put the same thing in 2 times, I'm not guaranteed to get the same thing out 2 times. So I think what you have to think about when you are building something mission critical for something like defense or healthcare or heavily regulated industries like insurance, you've got to be aware of what you can automate and what requires a human in the process. So in all of these things, one of the places we've used AI very heavily is anything where there is just a whole lot of routine work, processing a lot of documents, going through a huge amount of data that comes in and trying to connect it. And if you get a misstated connection, either you didn't find a connection between A and B that you should have, or you connected A and B and you shouldn't have, it's entirely possible that that's not going to throw off somebody's diagnosis, or a decision maker in the defense industry isn't going to base their decision on that. But there is all of this work in the back end that you're going to be doing, the process, that AI can be a huge help, and then include a human in the loop and say, great, we can test this, we can look for specific patterns where we're seeing some failures. The world of what we call evals or evaluations has exploded over the past year or so. So really good ways to get the things like LLMs, so your ChatGPT, your OpenAI, well, OpenAI is ChatGPT, your Claude, to find its own errors has grown a tremendous amount, so that the number of errors is going to be much smaller, and that you can start seeing here are the places where it typically breaks down. I think those kind of evaluations, human in the loop, and putting them in a place where the results are not the mission critical, the quick, the decisions that really ought to be done by someone who has an ethical and moral decision-making power is, the dividing line between where you can use AI and where you need to have the human step in and say, okay, this was my choice.
Yeah, that's right. And also, we can think from the compliance point of view that it could be a roadblock on, let's say, how do we use AI to get return on investment, but also stay compliant? Do you have any thoughts on that?
That's an interesting question. So compliance requirements often means there's a long, and it's not just a checklist. It's not to minimize it, but there's a lot of things you have to be doing. So everybody knows SOC 2 or HIPAA compliance or number of ISO 27001, I think is the international standard. What you can use AI for, and there's a lot of companies that is to go through to see if you can find quickly places to check that are of concern, to make sure you've gone through and done a number of things to evaluate the quality of how you've answered questions or created documentation or provided transparency. These tools are fantastic for going through and saying, like, all right, these are areas you need to make sure you double check. It can help create drafts really quickly. I've been in a position where, we needed a number of policies that were in place. So it had to have, we needed compliance with SOC 2, and it's like, all right, you need to have business continuity compliance, and it needs to have documentation. An initial draft can be written in just moments, and then you take that to lawyers and the technical staff and the leadership to say, great, now how do we edit this? It can often be just a big momentum issue, right? So it's often hard to just get started on some of those compliance issues. This is a terrific way to get 75% of the way there, and then focus your time to really pay attention to the details and make sure you've got all the items buttoned up. But to get that momentum started and to get more activity going quicker, AI is a terrific solution.
And how would we say we are building a sustainable system? Do we say that we take this 75%, or is there another way to go through this?
So sustainable in the sense that it can be doing things itself, or that it will live just throughout the history of the company?
Probably that it will be sustainable from the source's point of view. Not sustainable by itself, but it will be sustained by the company itself. Like the company won't require additional sources and resources all the time in order to sustain the system by itself.
Yeah, it's got to be a bit of a living document. Like, as the company grows and changes, it needs to be aware. This is a place that I think AI truly shines. So you can set it up to run every so often and say, and give it the scope to understand your files. Maybe you are a company that uses Atlassian and a lot of your files are in Confluence, or perhaps you use Notion or Google Drive. And you can say to a tool like this, once a week, once a month, go through and check to see if there are new documents, there are changes to the documents, compare that against the compliance documents that we have, and flag any differences, anything that is new that we don't have documented. And you can start getting those, just automate an email to whoever is required to do compliance, or have it draft a new section and say, here, I've drafted a section, you want to edit that, and then approve it, and it will go into the document. And then you get this terrific continual updating process that goes on, that as the company adds things, there is someone in the background, something in the background that is constantly minding those changes are. It's been given permission. It doesn't actually say write it all and just say you're done and you're updated. It tells the human that has to approve it, specifically like legal or technical groups, to say, hey, something's changed. You need to pay attention to that, without it just becoming a drudgery on the group to be like, all right, every month now let's go through the documents. What did we add? What did we find? And it can be a horrific process to keep that updated and have it proactively reach out to people to say, guess what? You just onboarded a new CRM tool, and that CRM tool has to have certain permissions set down. The AI, have noticed this because I see some documentation or a new contract. Make sure that you are doing what you're supposed to when you go through and write it into your compliance documents.
Yeah, that's an excellent use case. It's something that LLMs right now truly shine into text applications at least. So that's
Yeah.
something that we would say that they are pretty good at compared to other use cases.
And it's one of those things that it doesn't have to be 100% right, correct? And so it can say,
True.
here's what I grabbed, and I think these are all the parameters that need to be set in your new tool. And you go, oh, great, I'll look through that. And then there's someone taking the time to go through it and say, oh, it got 98% of them, but there's a couple of items there, as opposed to just lingering in the background. And suddenly the CTO or the legal compliance officer is like, oh, I've got to go back over the past 6 months and figure out everything we added and what did we change and what did we not change. And so it's a tremendous help without having to be perfect in what it's doing.
Yeah, that's right. So from experience, I run a consultancy that audits businesses in order to basically find AI opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
In your experience, how have you seen data scaling through different platforms? And how do you see most of these companies actually burning money?
How do I see data scaling? What? Give me a little more.
Basically, as someone could be, for example, using a lot of storage, but not actively needing it. So basically, as we would say, they are burning money because it's not something that they actually get a return on investment. If that
I
makes it more clear right now.
thank you for that. I would say that the first part of the question about storage is something I've seen less of a concern. Storage has become very, very cheap compared to compute. So the big place that I counsel places to look and to worry about is the amount of compute they need to use for these things. And a lot of these LLMs are not cheap in terms of the number of tokens that you have to feed through. So where I see a lot of extra expenditure is companies who are just throwing everything in the world at the LLM and saying, okay, if I just give it 900 documents and ask it, a question about like, fix this, it's going to churn. It's not going to be well directed. They're going to have to go back and forth a ton of times, when had they taken a few minutes to say, all right, what is the real question we have to ask? And what among our content is most focused to answer the question we've got at the time? You'll get a better answer. It will be less expensive in terms of all of the compute and the tokens that you have to expend trying to get the LLM to give you a decent answer. And you don't have to worry so much about the cost in that case. I know a lot of companies have tons and tons of data storage. Data storage, as opposed to just like text storage, can get more expensive. But even that, the price comes down quite a bit. If the amount of data is kind of an issue, I never suggest throwing away data. I'm a data hoarder. I've worked at enough companies where I've had something and somebody had an issue come up and somebody will be like, didn't we have that like a couple of months ago? And then you want to go break out stuff from, AWS has the iceberg or ice storage, frozen storage, things that cost, fractions of a penny for a month. It's not easily accessed. I recommend to everybody, save as much data as you possibly can, because you're going to find a need for it later on. That said, using it and using it well is the real challenge when working with these AI tools, and giving it the right context, the right information at the right time. And that takes our human thought. These are the things that we can't just let the computer take over for us. Like, make sure you're asking the right questions. What goes into that question? What's really needed? So that you don't spend an entire afternoon just burning through your allotment on Claude or ChatGPT, and then suddenly it's like, hey, you hit your limit. Sorry about that. And you're like, I didn't even get halfway through my question.
Yeah, that's right. Also, from architecting all of these systems, from your experience, how would someone approach it in order to architect a well-designed system with AI?
A well-designed system using AI. Well, there's a couple of things. Is the LLM central to the product you're using, or is it an extra or interesting feature? So perhaps you give the person has an application and you want a chatbot kind of like technology, and you can ask things and interact with the system via completely chat. In that case, you want to make sure that the core system is structured in such a way as that it's not burdened by the LLM and not burdened by perhaps downtime or the delay that the chat system has. Sometimes these have a little bit of latency. You want to make sure that core product is structured in such a way as to do what it needs to do without relying on the LLM or whatever the AI tool is. If your tool has an LLM at the core of it, there are a few things to worry about at that point. Latency, outages, you're kind of beholden to whether or not the company that provides you that service, again, OpenAI, Anthropic, maybe Mistral, or Together AI, or whatever company you're choosing, if they have an outage or a problem, then your tool does as well. In that case, the way I suggest is think about things like graceful degradation. Do you have a fallback? Can it do, if the problem is by a provider, is it just that model? Maybe you have a fallback and it alerts the user we're having an issue using a faster model. Or you let the user choose, like, this one's going to be slower, but it's more robust. This one's going to be faster if you have an easy question. Or use a couple of providers. So perhaps you are using both OpenAI and Anthropic, or maybe you have a local system that you're running an open source model that you don't like as much, or at least the quality of the answers is a little bit less. Maybe it's less personalized, maybe it's a little more hurt, and it doesn't quite get at what you want every time, but it's there, and you don't break the experience for the user. You just say, hey, we're having an issue. Here's, a completed thing. So I find parallelism in that way, and redundancy. I guess the word I want there is redundancy in that way, to make sure that the experience doesn't break. Then you've got a number of things that you want to be smart about the way you work with the LLM, and things that most engineering teams will already know: caching, preserving information. Do you have repeated requests? Are you going back and forth to the LLM for the same thing? Then there's a way to save latency and time if you can, always get the same context put in rather than having to query the context over and over again. Cache results if the query kind of happens to be the same over and over again with just a slight bit of difference. There are your typical standard processes for speeding these things up that, this is one of the interesting parts, is the core parts of engineering have not disappeared because we're using LLMs. We just need to be aware that with LLMs at the core of what we're doing, we're oftentimes giving the core of the heart of our system over to another company, and have to figure out, all right, well, if we do that, what happens when that company isn't able to provide? Just the other morning, there was a outage briefly for Anthropic, and that just meant that I couldn't use it for about 30 minutes. And to me, if I'm doing my own private work, that's fine. If I'm a company trying to service thousands of customers an hour, that's totally unacceptable. So how do you handle that breakage, and is all about the graceful degradation.
Yeah, that's right. And you see that I'm laughing because you said that these are the basics of engineering and core of engineering. And basically, everyone is saying that engineers will be gone in 6 months from now, so they won't be needed anymore.
I am torn. I have to admit to you that I am absolutely torn. I don't know what this is going to look like. I don't think the basics of engineering go away. In very much in the ways, I don't think the basics of problem solving go away.
Mm-hmm.
If people ask me if there's any point in learning to code anymore, and I answer yes, but not because the jobs are all going to be you looking at walls of Python or Go, or who knows, maybe somebody out there is producing a whole bunch of Haskell or something. But knowing what's going on under the hood is a tremendous benefit. When I, started out and needing to learn data science and machine learning, I had the benefit of a very technical background in mathematics, econometrics, statistics. I didn't spend my day solving matrix algebra problems or handwriting regressions. Like, the tools could do that in the blink of an eye, and I could write that out in one line. And most statistical tools, it's just regressing x on y, and there you go. You don't have to be able to write out what it's doing. But by knowing what's going on under the hood, I was better able to diagnose problems. I understood what was the right way to ask something a question. When it gave me an answer, I could better understand, all right, this is why I think it's happening this way. So for code, when it comes out and you can look at it and say, all right, I don't have to look at it all the time. Tons of places are going to this, humans don't write code, they just review the code. But you're still going to have to understand, like you mentioned, system architecture. Why would we want to do it this way? I can have the LLM create a whole application where OpenAI is at the core of it, but if I don't think through the whole problem of like, well, but if I can't get to OpenAI because their system goes out, or I didn't pay my bill and they're not going to like complete my AI API requests, what happens then? The LLM doesn't have the ability to just be like, I'm going to think through every single possible problem that a company could have. It's going to answer the question you asked. It's up to you to think through the questions and ask the right ones.
Yeah, that's right. And I think it goes through on when you are a junior and you don't have experience, you need to learn code in order to figure out how to solve these sort of problems.
Right.
So it's basically, I would describe it as a vehicle instead of the tool nowadays to do the job. Because the tool nowadays to do the job with AI and all these tools that they are getting out there will be your critical thinking at the end of the day.
I agree.
So, yeah. What do you think is the gap between a deployed system, a deployed application right now, and actually seeing the business impact of having AI in that application?
I think the biggest gap is people often don't have a great framing of what problem they need it to solve.
Mhm.
And they may think to themselves, "Oh, well, I just need it to like I need this feature to have." Let's keep going with the example. I need to have a chat feature on my application.
Mhm.
You come to the website, they need to be able to ask chat a question. Well, okay, and you successfully can do that, and there's providers out there that do this in a heartbeat. Great, you have AI chat now. But was your problem that people were bouncing too fast? They would leave because it was too confusing? Are they not able to get to a particular solution very quickly? Like everybody who shows up is looking for my hours of operation, or everybody's looking to figure out some answer about what am I allowed to do with this website, or does it have this particular function, and they couldn't find it before. If the measure is, time on the website, then what you want is people to stick around, and that's one measure. But if they are getting an answer really quickly and being satisfied, that's the wrong measure. If the answer is finding a solution very quickly and then continuing with your application or whatever it is, then you can measure ROI by saying, when people ask the question, did they have to ask 7 times to get their answer, or did they get their answer in one turn? That is a great definition of success that says, now I've done something I wanted. The AI is returning investment because people spend less time being confused. People are satisfied with the answer much more quickly. I find that this gap, when people just say like, well, I've deployed AI, but I've not seen a great return. I'm like, well, what were you hoping to get from it? This goes back to the engineering problem. Like, well, what problem are you trying to solve, and are you measuring it well? My advice to companies when I do this is always to pick something relatively small, because it has a great definition of done, and it has a great connection to whatever issue you want. You want to convert more people from just looking at your site into subscribed. Is it driving that? You want to convert more people to signing up for something. You want more paid consumers. Are you getting more of that because of the small AI thing you instantiated? Or on the back end, if it's part of some internal tooling, I feel like too many people are worrying about like, well, is this going to save me 50% of my budget by next year? It's like, well, that's aiming a little high, and it's hard to put that much on one initiative. So what about, can the people who work here process claims a bit faster, or can they work through backlog on financials faster? They are getting back some of their time. Are they able to, do they report being more satisfied with their job because they're not doing all of this manual work themselves? They can put that into an AI, and it will go through all of the receipts. So whoever like closes out the books at the end of the month or deals with receipts from all of the people that are coming in, maybe that's no longer 3 days at the end of every month that just drive them crazy. Maybe that's an hour of just, okay, great, I went through, I checked that everything was done correctly, now let's move on. And in terms of hard numbers, that can be hard to capture, but you can say there's something great. That person isn't driven crazy by their job. I'm not at risk of losing these people. I'm not going to have to go through recruitment or whatever it is, and say, like, there's a specific target that I'm trying to get: employee satisfaction, customer satisfaction. Here's how I'm trying to get it, this very specific item. AI tackles that, and then by saying what those are, I can then measure, did it do those things? If it did, great. Now expand from there. Start small and expand your range once you've seen that it works in the small scale.
Yeah, that's right. And I think also it ties back to product as well, as you
Mhm.
mentioned before, with your experience as well in product. If you're trying to solve a problem for your users and you're making your product a lot better, how do you measure that with AI in order to actually see your return on investment? That's an interesting question, and I really like how you have highlighted the answer here because it's not as straightforward since everyone is applying AI now, and sometimes it's not even straightforward why.
Right.
Yeah. So some of the missions of this podcast is to basically also help people that they are not so technical to feel a little bit more confident and not so threatened by AI. So, how have you seen all these large scale pivots succeed in culture? Like, we have seen a massive shift with AI. For example, we have seen a study that was published by Harvard Research that they said that people are using chatbots now as therapists, as companions. We have seen AI changing the culture so much. So, how do we see technology impact culture, but also people feel more confident and not threatened by it?
That's a great question, because I feel like we're at a place where there is so much media coverage about AI, and are we going to hit artificial general intelligence next week, and is it coming, and is it going to come for everything, and is it going to destroy all of white collar jobs? And this does anybody any favors. It just makes it a terrifying situation. The best advice I give or can give anybody is to try it. One of the things is, if you're worried about it and you think it probably isn't for me, or I'm worried about it, you may not know very well what it is. It is very low cost to adopt. You can try these things for free without ever having to pay anything. Or if you want to see how it works a little bit, you can pay for the basic plan, maybe $10 a month on one of these, and test it out. See what it is good at. See what it's bad at. Give it some documents and say, summarize this document, or help me think through an answer to some questions that I got. See what it does and what it's capable of. I think people, once they get their hands on it, will start realizing, oh, this is a truly generationally important technology, but it is not going to be our overlords and take every job and make everybody completely obsolete, and it's not going to decide to kill humanity. There's that one book, and I've forgotten who wrote it, that's just basically like, if anybody builds super intelligence, we're all going to die. That doesn't help anybody. That doesn't get you past this concern. At companies, when I see this, one of the things is always, well, we're concerned about like leakage of IP. We're concerned about leakage of our things into this big morass of a system. There are, at the very base, there are levels of plans that you can sign up for. On Anthropic, I believe it's called the Teams level. At OpenAI, I think it's called an enterprise level, where they immediately can say, you will not train or save the data that we send you. So you can be concerned, you can be fine with any IP leaking or things that are of concern to your company. Now, do not give them HIPAA compliant HIPAA information. Do not put in, things, if you work at an insurance company and dump in a whole bunch of records, like, you've got to get HIPAA compliance, you've got to get a whole lot of other things for that. I'm not saying that. But at larger companies, I will say, go that route, and then let people just work with it, and they will come to you and tell you what it is they've started finding great use cases for. I think of this as very much a bottoms up kind of tool for a lot of reasons. Big companies are always going to say we need to be doing this more. Great. But instead of going out and saying, one person has the right idea and they know how AI will fix the entire company, give the people the tools to say, try it out. What are you using it for? What does our legal department use it for? What does the marketing department use it for? And hear from them and then say, like, all right, this is great. We're not going to do every marketing campaign by just typing into, ChatGPT, create my marketing campaign for 2026. But people can try 100 different drafts. They can test things out, and they can be working at a much higher pace. They can be thinking at a much higher level than just, okay, where's the one document where I have to type in this and I've got to format these things. So once people start just getting their hands dirty, I feel like a lot of that fear goes away because they start seeing it do different things, or things that the human is regularly capable of doing, that you'll get a note from the LLM saying, like, I'm sorry, I can't help with that. I don't know what that is. Or, here's an attempt. And you're like, oh, that's just terrible. And you go, oh, I see. Here's what it's good at. Here's what it's bad at. I'm no longer as worried that this thing's going to take my job in 3 weeks.
Yeah, that's right. And also, I would say that a job in the bigger picture is just a sum of tasks. So if AI can do some of the part of the tasks that you were doing before, it doesn't mean that it doesn't need review anymore, or that you won't at least come up to do the least 5 or 10% of the job that was left. Maybe it doesn't take you the same time and you add another task to your job role. But I think it won't eliminate completely things that you were doing before.
Yeah, I would say
Yeah,
when
yeah.
you hear someone like Dario Amodei of Anthropic at World Economic Forum say things like, all white collar jobs are going to be like 50% of white collar jobs are gone in 6 months. That's great. He's trying to raise a certain amount of money to get a valuation for his company. Totally understand his need to do that. But I find, especially among the people who've got a Silicon Valley view of the world, that they radically underestimate how much of working life is human to human negotiation interaction. The people who spend all day in Zoom or on Google Meets talking to each other probably realize this. But you cannot simply just point two LLMs at each other and say it's going to get the same thing out of it as, say, you and I talking about what features to go build, or what sector of the consumer market we aren't capturing that we should think about capturing, and why we should go after those. They're just not accounting for the fact that so much of our work, even the tasks that we have, why is it on that list? Well, it's because it's there because I was chatting with my leadership, and this is how they want me to go about things, and then I need to work with my teams to get them to understand what we should be working on and versus what we shouldn't be working on. AI is great at how, right? And you just throw 900 things at it, it will try to do 900 things. But what you don't do, what you focus on, what you'll put off to some other time, it just doesn't have the context or the understanding of why we might try to do that. And that's still going to be humans, because otherwise you just are throwing everything into the kitchen sink and hoping the blender solves it.
Yeah, that's right. The only thing that I want to ask you, because you mentioned before that you would advise someone in a company to go and give this tool to all of the employees and figure out use cases. Do you think that, for example, skills that they are pretty new and everyone is talking about right now inside these LLMs are a good way of identifying these use cases, because these skills are created based on a repetitive task that, let's say, a legal person is doing? So yeah,
Yes.
what's your 2 cents on that?
I think it's a terrific point. I am a huge fan of skills. I feel like I was a little late to it. So I have a good friend who was like, "Wait, you aren't using skills and cursor all the time?" And I was like, "Wait, no, I wasn't really." Now I've just become a complete convert. So the way to think about skills is, an LLM is generally trained to solve any sort of problem you throw at it. It is a very general purpose kind of tool. Skills are a terrific way to get a little more focus and expertise into the workflow that you're doing. So if you have, like you mentioned, legal, if there's contract review, so I want the system to go through and look for a very particular set of things because I do some kind of legal business M&A, and every time I read a contract, there are 13, I don't know, they're lawyers, maybe there's 1,300 things that I look for every single time just as a first pass. That's great. That's a perfect case for a skill where you give it a skill. And this is people who aren't quite aware. It's usually a set of files underneath a little folder. The tools that are out there, ChatGPT, Claude, Cursor is a IDE, but has this, all of the things you hear about, Windsurf, anything from VS Code, all of these have the ability to use skills. And it sits as a little folder, and you say, every time you say to the LLM, review this contract for me, it will go, it'll find that skill just based on what you typed, and it goes, aha, you want the contract review skill. That is, and here is a whole checklist of all the things it checks every single time it goes through. And that way it does it the same way every time, and you know you've covered at least those bases. You might be looking for other things. Not being a lawyer, I'm not exactly sure how this works, but you know that you've got it and it's going to work this way every single time, as opposed to saying, hey, review this contract for me. And sometimes it picks the right things to review, sometimes it misses, and you've got to go back and forth. The skill is a terrific saying, like, this is the expert. I am doing very particular M&A things, and I need it to look for this information every single time. That's baked into the skill. And I do this now for a ton of different things. I even do it for some fun stuff around my city. Pittsburgh has an absolutely terrific culture around Lenten fish fries. So churches around Pittsburgh have just really big deals in doing like fried fish on Fridays. We have an entire group of people called Code for Pittsburgh, and they build this terrific map where they are, what their hours are, if they do kids events, if they have various other things. Do they have not only fish fries, but other options? All of that stuff is coded out there. I built a skill so that my agent can just go to that map and I can say like, hey, Swissvale, what fish fry do I have? And it goes, all right, great. Here's the timing. Here's what they've got. If you're looking for ones that have pierogi as well, great. Here's one that's nearby that has not only fried fish, but also pierogi.
Yeah, that's right. I really like your approach towards explaining the skills to people and also like how to use it. I think we will find more use cases from taking the skills that will be created from people than just asking people, because sometimes, you know, when you get into a questionnaire, it feels a little bit too formal, I would say. I don't think most people actually answer all of the questions as they should in a questionnaire. So yeah. Another question that I had was, how do we get humans in the loop in systems like this inside companies to actually evaluate these systems? Because, okay, let's say a company actually develops and implements an AI system in order to get return on investment. But who actually checks the system, and who is actually ready to review and check the system? And as a second question to that, sorry, I will frame it all together, is how do we make people also trust this system? Because we tend to also see that AI is some sort of a black box because it's probabilistic. So sometimes you get something correct, but sometimes you get also something that it's completely bullshit, let's say.
Yeah. It's a terrific point. I think of AI as, especially in this area, as much more of a team sport. So there is a technical solution and there is a business solution. So getting humans in the loop is a paired process. I have been in cases where what you want is both the technical side, and this gets into what, you know, traces and all of the dashboarding, and to understand what did it do and how did it run the process and did it find documents, and building what we call evaluations. Everything from, you know, what's typically called like a haystack problem is like you can run an evaluation. It's like, all right, I gave it all this content. Did it find this one small thing? And I did. I know it's running the test pretty well. So you see evaluations and you can say, great. There's a ton of different types of evaluations. That's just one that people generally have heard of. The industry for evaluations is growing. There's lots of companies that provide sort of evaluations as a service out of the box that you can hook up to your LLM system. That's much more the technical side. You also want to get the business side involved. Someone to take a look at the outputs to say, does this sound like our company? Does this answer the questions that I know our users are going to have? Or, even if it's internal, are these the kinds of things that I'm going to want to report up to my leadership, and they're going to report to the CEO, and we're going to report to the board? Are we getting the right kind of information out of it? I tend to not trust a lot of things. So my distrust goes to the LLMs as well. I want to see the technical evaluation, see that it's performing routinely in a very particular way. And I want to see the business side say, yes, the output we're getting from this is routinely exactly what we want. Again, if it comes down to there's a number in a spreadsheet that is going to say we're about to allocate $30 million to some decision, that's got to be reviewed by a human, because we don't want to just pretend that suddenly like this thing is like the LLM is going to know the exact right number. That said, for context, for understanding what are other decisions that have been made, how much have we put into other products, how much have we made on these things in the past, you get wonderful context, and you can get all of this decision support, the decisions remaining in the human hands. So I want to see the LLM evaluations from the technical side and from the business side. And I find that once those things are in place and you can identify where things go wrong, people trust what comes out a bunch more, because it's no longer as black boxy as it was before. It's like, all right, this thing's just magic. I trust whatever it spits out. Nope, we can parse apart quite a bit of what's coming back, what got sent to it, why did it get sent there, what information from that context did we start using, and you can break that apart and get people to see, like, look, this is what it's doing. Even if it's wrong, I find that people start to trust that, okay, I can go in and fix the parts that are wrong because I understand much more about what it's doing.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think we should have a case of a person checking the system, because at the end of the day, in the business case, you send something out as a company, as a brand name, it takes a little mistake to see a stock flip, to see maybe investments go out. So yeah, it's a big deal in how your company sounds.
Absolutely. And this has gone back, plenty of times in my career. I have gone through all of this work to do analyses and put together models and predictions and all of this stuff. And I've been in a meeting and somebody will say, really? But wait, go back to that one slide. What's that number? And for whatever reason, they happen to know that that number is not correct. They have stopped paying attention to the rest of it. They lose all trust in the rest of what you're doing because you did some form of group buy in your SQL, or you pulled the wrong table, or you pulled a table that was out of date by a month. And suddenly there's tons of trust, all of this loss of trust in the rest of it because one of those small things is gone. So anytime you're in a position where people need to trust those outputs, you just have to spend the time, whether it's an LLM, whether it's just data analysis, whatever you're doing.
Yeah, that's right. So, as a last question that I ask towards all of my guests, I would like your perspective on where you think AI is going
Ooh.
and what you think of the hype of AI.
I can answer the second one much better than I can the first one.
Okay.
I am I am largely put off by the hype. Like it is going so far, and we have these companies that are valued at crazy numbers because there's just this fascination with it being an answer to everything in the world. I credit Scott Galloway with this statement, but right now America is a one gigantic bet on AI. The vast majority of our economic gains over the past year have been because of AI deals and data centers and these promised spends that these companies almost certainly cannot come through with. And I think in the long run, that's really dangerous. But also on the smaller level, if we start talking about these things as magic, as taking over, as replacing everyone, then you get all of this pushback. And I think right now there's a real chance that the biggest enemy of AI is AI, because people hear it and they're like, they see art being done by AI. They see everybody saying, like, we're going to make movies entirely by AI. And I think there's space for that. I've got no problem with people making art through AI or making an AI movie, but it's pitched as just totally destroying these industries. And I think there's going to be a pretty big backlash once people think like, oh my gosh, it's coming for us. And these tools can be of amazing use if we understand them and we use them responsibly. I would love to see a lot more activity on the part, at least in the US, of our federal government about how they're being used and what's being done. Right now, our government has just basically stopped paying attention to any sort of like regulation or interest in the uses of it, other than the fact that data centers can bring in some tax money. So where do I see it going? The pace seems to be slowing a little bit. Like the difference in ChatGPT 3 to 4 was astounding. Like I just from, hey, it's kind of funny. This can make a poem about my PowerPoint presentation to, oh, GPT-4 suddenly sounds and functions and works a lot like a junior coworker. And now within writing code, the step forward in OpenAI's Opus 4.6, Anthropic's Opus 4.6 and OpenAI's Codex 5.3 seems like this terrific jump in coding, but we don't see that in the conversation in the way it's be able to reason. And I take issue with the word reasoning. It's not really doing reasoning. It's more just very, very clever processing. But I think we're going to see a leveling off of these major jumps in anything outside of writing code. And that might mean that some of this hype slows down a little bit. I don't know if that's bad for the economy, but when we start seeing the fact that the speed here is slowing a little bit, which is not a terrible thing, but it's just I think a function of the fact that the technology underneath these LLMs are not infinitely scalable. We can't just keep throwing more data at it and then suddenly hit AGI by magic. People will start realizing like, oh, there is a limit to what we can do with this.
Yeah, and I think it comes down also to the scaling laws. So for everyone who is not aware, scaling laws is the amount of exponential progress that you will get as more you also grow the compute power that you give to the model as well. So we kind of see that, okay, more compute now doesn't equally reflects to more reasoning or better understanding. So maybe we reach that limit, and for maybe a higher reasoning, we need different architecture or a different system. It doesn't mean that LLMs are bad. They have their own use cases, but definitely it's not the solution for everything at the moment, at least as I'm seeing it.
Totally agreed. And the rise of things they're calling world models, and Jan LeCun going off and building his own company, and a number of other people doing the same, I think is just proof that these scaling laws have started to reach, at least as far as we can see, some of their limits.
Yeah. And also I would like for you to tell us where people can find you.
Oh, sure. I appreciate that. I'm on LinkedIn. It's Ian P. Cook, IANP Cook. But I keep a website with my appearances, my current projects, my work, and then I also do, my own consulting, which is much more building prototypes for people, fast prototypes at fiercehighways.ai. So plural, fiercehighways.ai. So feel free to reach out. There's a contact button on there. I always love hearing from people and love having just these conversations, and just interacting with folks about this topic is absolutely thrilling to me. It's been a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much.
It's been a fantastic conversation too, and I have learned so much from your experience as well. It has been great talk, and I would actually wish to have you also in the future as well at some point.
I am more than happy to come back anytime. It's been terrific.
Great. Thank you very much, and have a great day.
You too.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.